Welcome to the Mound Science and Energy Seminar Association for February the 24th, 2021. My name is Bob Bowman. I'm a director with the on the board of the Mound Museum Association. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Mr. John Zimkus. John is a retired American history teacher who taught for 35 years in the Lebanon City School District. In addition, John has been a historian of the Warren County Historical Society since 1990 and has been the Society's education director since 2008. Also, since 2007, he has been the official historian for the famous and historic Golden Lamb Inn in Lebanon. We are very pleased to have John tonight. We welcome him to our series, and the title of John's presentation is Neil Armstrong, the Reluctant Hero, who was our neighbor in Warren County. And without any further delay, here's John.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to your organization. This is a talk I first gave back in 2014. They were dedicating a small section of road in Lebanon from State Route 123 to State Route 63. And they were going to name it Neil Armstrong Way, because it was in a whole mile and a half of where Neil Armstrong lived. Neil was a very important person in Turtlecreek Township and Warren County and in the Lebanon area. As you may know, Neil Alden Armstrong was born on August 5th, 1930. He was the first of three children of Stephen and Viola Armstrong. His younger sister's name was June, and then his brother's name was Dean. His dad worked for the Ohio Auditors Department and traveled quite a bit. While Neil was growing up, he moved some 20 times. And although he did graduate from Wapakoneta High School, he was actually only in the house he was in there for about a year or two at that time. He went to his first air show when he was 2 years old, the Cleveland Air Show. He loved flying, the idea of flying, and as you may know, he got his pilot's license before he got his driver's license. He attended Purdue University studying aerospace engineering, and it's part of the Navy program, sort of the ROTC program. And he considered his time at Purdue he couldn't be happier. It was one of the best times of his life. Unfortunately, in the middle of his time in college, the Korean War broke out, and at the age of 20, he became a fighter pilot. He flew some 78 combat missions and was actually shot down and had to parachute into the Sea of Japan. He married a classmate, Janet, in January 28th of 1956. They would have three children. Rick, whose real name was Eric, but Rick, he was born in 1957. Karen was born in 1959, and Mark was born in 1963. I taught Mark in school, Mark Armstrong, and that's where I got to meet Janet. Neil never came to parent-teacher conferences. In 1955, Neil was a civilian test pilot, and he flew the X-15 rocket plane. In 1962, he was chosen to be what was called the New Nine, the next group of astronauts. He was the backup commander of Gemini mission, Gemini 5 in August of 1965. He was the command pilot of Gemini 8, the first docking of two space vehicles. And he also was the backup commander of Gemini 11. And of course, the commander of Apollo 11, the first lunar landing. He was so engrossed in what he was doing, he had very little time for his family. His wife once said he had 6.5 days he dedicated a week to being an astronaut. He was a very loving father, but only when he had time to be with his kids. After the lunar flight, he worked for NASA. Then he left NASA in 1971. He became a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. Moved to Lebanon, or the Lebanon area. Left his position at UC in 1980. In 1986, he became the vice chairman of the Presidential Commission investigating the shuttle disaster, the Challenger accident. He was decorated by some 17 countries, got the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal, and the Congressional Space Medal of Honor. He and his wife, Janet, divorced in 1994 after 38 years of marriage. Later that year, he married his second wife, Carol, and they moved to Indian Hill, an affluent neighborhood north of Cincinnati. He died on August 25th of 2012 in Cincinnati Hospital at the age of 82 after complications from heart bypass surgery. On Friday, September 14th, 2012, after a prayer and the sounding of taps and a 21-gun salute on the deck of the guided missile cruiser, the USS Philippine Sea, his ashes were dropped into the Atlantic Ocean. Now, what I'm going to do tonight is not talk about Neil Armstrong, the astronaut, or the test pilot, or the University of Cincinnati aerospace engineering professor. I'm going to talk about Neil Armstrong, a neighbor of mine, if you will. He lived in Warren County in Turtlecreek Township for 23 years of his life, longer than any other place in his entire life was in Warren County, about 2.5, 3 miles from the Golden Lamb, if you will. Many magazines and newspapers have called him a recluse, or a man who prized his privacy. The Cincinnati Post in 1976 had an article calling him Cincinnati's invisible hero. And somewhat hyperbolically, they made the statement, "Not since Charles Lindbergh has any winged world hero sought seclusion with so ferociously, and no living celebrated person other than Greta Garbo has been so good at wanting to be left alone and doing so." Well, that was a bit much. That was not Neil Armstrong. He did not live a solitary life. He did not withdraw from society. James R. Hansen, the man who wrote the only authorized book on Neil Armstrong's life, First Man, The Life of Neil Armstrong, in 2005, once said the idea that he was a recluse and wanted to avoid the media was false. He did not want to be rich or famous based on being the first man on the moon. He left that part to the history books. Neil himself said once in 1976, "I am not interested in publicity or being the subject of feature stories. Never have been." There are things, however, that were very personal to him, and he did not talk about. On January 28th of 1962, Neil and Janet lost their 2.5-year-old daughter, Karen, who had been suffering for some 6 months battling an inoperable brain tumor. She died of pneumonia. She died on their 6th wedding anniversary. They never celebrated that anniversary again. Back in 2005, Hansen remarked that 7 years after that, when people were helping him work on the lunar landing project, many of his coworkers had no idea that he once had a daughter. He never mentioned her. Michael Collins, one of the 2 members of that famous flight, has also been accused of being a recluse. He says, "It's true, I've never enjoyed the spotlight. I don't know why. I've always sort of felt sorry for Michael Collins. He's sort of you're going to the Academy Awards and you're driving the car and you have to wait in the car where all the exciting things happen inside. He once said, I guess I'm the only person who's not watching the lunar landing on television. Now, Buzz Aldrin was another matter. He loved publicity, an intelligent man, a very fine scientist, but he did appear on Late Night with David Letterman, interviewing stars from the daytime Emmys wearing a astronaut suit. He appeared on The Big Bang Theory playing himself. He appeared at Dancing with the Stars, and he once punched out a guy who tried to get him to swear on a Bible in front of a camera that he really did walk on the moon. He also had another reason why he perhaps should have been the first one to walk on the moon. His mother's maiden name was Moon. His mother was Marion Moon Aldrin. But the people at NASA like the quiet dignity of Neil. Officially, they said Neil was going to walk on the moon first because he was sitting closest to the door. That may have not have been the case. It may have been they thought the calmness and quietness of Neil would be perhaps more appropriate. Neil, however, was, his family perhaps said it best. After his death, they said he was a reluctant American hero who always believed he was just doing his job. Neil would have agreed with Admiral Bull Halsey, who made the statement, "There are no extraordinary men, just extraordinary circumstances that ordinary men are forced to deal with." That is more of what Neil Armstrong was. Neil had to be convinced back in 2001 that having an authorized book written about him was a good idea. Henson did spend 3.5 hours talking to Neil and Janet and trying to convince them. They were asking him questions just as much as he was asking them questions. And they finally agreed that perhaps having this book written would be a good idea. He hated to be called an explorer. He says, "I'm a test pilot, not an adventurer." He blew up at the University of Cincinnati once during an Earth Day salute. They had a big banner saying, "Come see our spaceman." And he said, "How long must it take before I cease to be known as a spaceman?" There are certain things, he was a test pilot. That's the part of the lunar flight he loved the most. He had a pretty good sense of humor, too. And by the way, he was a very good musician. He was a good singer and also played at the marching band at Purdue University. On July 20th of 1994, the Apollo 11 crew was at the White House, and they were being honored for the 25th anniversary of the lunar landing. Neil approached the microphone and began very softly by saying, "Wilbur Wright once noted that the only bird that can talk is the parrot, and he doesn't fly very well. So I'll be brief." The next day, Thursday, July 21, Neil is back in Lebanon, Ohio. He's in the home of his secretary, Vivian White. She was his secretary in the Lebanon area for over 30 years. He's sitting there wearing an old t-shirt and old pants, sitting there, and he said, "Yesterday, I was at the White House and looking over at Vivian White." He said, "And today, I'm at the White House again." In 2006, in front of a group of some 300 people at the Cincinnati Museum Center, Neil was presenting them a piece of moon rock. Bock, B-O-C-K, was a 4-ounce moon rock, lightly gray, earth weight about 117 grams, aged 3.7 million years. Neil said at the time, I was the strange creature that kidnapped Bock from his homeland and brought him to the strange, new, still changing planet. I can't help feeling that I owe him an apology, or at least an explanation. And then he said, well, as he gave to them a piece of the rock, he said, it is my pleasure to present you with a chip off the old Bock. In 1971, he initially, after flying on the lunar landing, stayed with NASA, but they would not allow him to fly again. He was too valuable a hero, too valuable a public relations figure to ever once again go up in space. So he worked on as an administrator, but then he was frustrated because he was solely being used for photo opportunities. So finally, in 1971, he leaves NASA and takes a job teaching at the University of Cincinnati in aerospace engineering. He said, Janet said, Neil wanted to realize a more quiet life. He spent all those years on the space program and had little time to himself. He was once asked at a press conference, how do you prepare to secure normalcy in your private life in the years ahead? And he looked at the reporter and said, well, that's really up to you. The Western Star newspaper, a newspaper out of Lebanon, which published for over 200 years before it closed, on Wednesday, the 15th of December, in 1971, had a headline, Neil Armstrong, Lebanon bound, ? Area residents are abuzz, according to the article, that Neil Armstrong was going to move to the Lebanon area. Calls were made to the University of Cincinnati office. The information office kept on saying, we don't know. He's got some sort of scheduled press conference coming up. He'll probably tell you then. 2 days later, the Dayton Daily News had an article, Moon's Armstrong, just the guy next door to neighbors. He had moved to a small subdivision, about 10 or 12 years old, off of State Route 48, about 2.5 miles north of Lebanon, off a road called Turner Drive. It was a single street subdivision. Some people, Mrs. Armstrong said to the reporter, we are delighted to be here. The home was, like I said, 10 or 12 years old. One neighbor said, it looks like he's gained weight. Another one was reported saying, he's right there helping him move in. Another said, I think it's very flattering that he chose our community to live in. And one said, I feel he wanted to get out of the and be left alone. I think he wants to get out of the limelight and just live a regular life. In preparing for the book, Janet, being interviewed by Henson, talked about her first view of the Lebanon area and talked about driving through Lebanon. And she said, we drove all around the area and it was the best thing outside of the Beltway at the time. I remember we went into the ice cream parlor, which is right across the street from the Golden Lamb, if you know Lebanon, and just cased the place. It seemed like a safe community, a good place to raise children. We thought we were seeing people we could identify with in that town. Neil, a few years earlier, said, I have chosen to bring up my family as normal environment as possible. They had bought a 19th century farmhouse off the State Route 123 north of Lebanon, but it had to be gutted and redone. Neil did not like to owe money, so he only paid cash for what was going on in the house, which meant the contractor worked there for 7 years straight. I don't know if you remember the old Murphy Brown show, where that Murphy Brown had a guy who was constantly painting her apartment the entire run of the show. But this was sort of like the contractor. Janet said once he became like a member of the family. He would answer the phone if nobody was there. He would pick up the kids from school. Neil named his 300 plus acres Rivendell, which was the name of a secluded valley in J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth fiction, The Lord of the Rings. It was the last home of a half-elf, half-human nobleman known as Elrond. People who heard that started speculating because in another book by Tolkien, the Hobbit, the main character, Bilbo Baggins, makes an invisible jump over the lecherous Gollum and describes it as not a great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Well, Neil said he may have read that, but he never thought of that when he made those famous remarks about one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. He said, the boys had me read it. I don't remember bumping into anything even that made me think of what I said then. When I first read that quote at the dedication of Neil Armstrong Way, his youngest son, Mark, said, I didn't tell him about that. Only my older brother, Rick, read the book. So he's the one who suggested that. The farm had about 70 or 90 cows, and they grew corn, soybeans, hay, and wheat. Janet said it was very difficult to shovel poop during the day and go out to a dinner party at night. The adjustment, however, was not always very smooth. The boys had a rough time in school. Mark, the younger one, was very gregarious, still is, and it didn't bother him. But Rick was more a sensitive kind, and the boys were sort of teased quite a bit for being the children of Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. And their parents didn't realize that until they were there for, quite a while. Back in 1999, Sandy Fusion, who was at the time part owner of that Village ice cream parlor, recalled in the 70s that Neil would almost be a regular in the Village ice cream parlor. He would order the daily soup and sandwich special, sit at the counter by himself drinking a glass of water, for the most part unrecognized by anybody. In the back, there was this 4-step area where they pushed three tables together, and it was called the businessman table. And your local dentist and eye doctor, a few lawyers, real estate people would all sit there and enjoy their meals. Sandy's mother, Phyllis Hartsook, walked up to Neil once and said, Neil, why don't you join the men at the businessman's table? And he said, they don't want me there. And then she went to one of the lawyers there, Barney Young, and said, Barney, why don't you invite Neil to sit with you? Why would Neil want to sit with us? Well, she finally got them together, and then Neil became an important part of that businessman's table. Sometimes people would come up to Phyllis and say, do you think I could ask him for an autograph? And she would tell him he doesn't like to be disturbed while he's eating. Today, if you go to the Village ice cream parlor, despite the fact that the family has sold it, there is still a copy of a Milton Caniff drawing of Neil Armstrong. Some of you might remember that Milton Caniff was the man who created Steve Canyon, grew up in this area of Southwest Ohio. He also was, until his death, the official illustrator of all the people inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame in Dayton. And on a copy of Neil Armstrong drawn by Milton Caniff, Neil wrote, to Phyllis, with appreciations for your patience, Neil Armstrong. Neil in 1978 almost left a part of him permanently in Warren County. It was November of 78. He was working on his farm. He was standing on the back of his truck, and he was going to jump off the back of the truck. He put his left hand on top of the barn door, and he jumped off. His wedding ring got caught on a nail and ripped his finger off. He was taken to initially Dr. George Van Harlingen's office. Now, Dr. Van, as he was called, was not Neil's doctor. He was the family's doctor. Technically, Neil's doctors were all NASA doctors. But the first thing Dr. Van told him is, where's the finger? And so they went back, found the finger. Now, this was in 78. Microsurgery was relatively new. He was flown to Louisville, Kentucky, where the finger was reattached. And it was an early type operation. He couldn't believe all the fuss made about his finger. And Mark told me that the finger was red for a while. Was movable, and the knuckle was sort of large, but he never put a wedding ring on it again. When I first gave this talk, the second or third time I gave the talk, in the audience was a member of the staff at the University of Cincinnati who once worked with Neil. And he remembers asking Neil, was it tough losing your finger? And Neil looked at him and said, no, it wasn't tough losing the finger. It was tough finding the finger. In around that same time, Neil became associated with Ralph J. Stolle. Now, those up in the Dayton area probably know all about Ernie Fraze, the man who invented the pop-top can. Well, his invention would be for naught had it not been for Ralph J. Stolle. Ralph J. Stolle is the man who invented the machine which could mass produce the pop-top can. And he became one of the most well-to-do and generous people in the Warren County area. And in 1971, Mr. Stolle wanted to start a YMCA in Lebanon. There hadn't been one since 1954. So it's, 15, 16 years later. They had, and Neil was put on the committee, which was going to find the location for that. So there was real estate people, there were lawyers, there were contractors, but Neil was the only one with any kind of engineering background. And Neil would call up YMCAs from all around the country and tell them, I'm Neil Armstrong. We are starting a YMCA here. Can we fly out and visit your facility? And nobody said no to Neil Armstrong. It was finally dedicated in 1978. Governor Rhodes was there, and Neil was on the board of directors for the first few years of what is now called the Ralph J. Stolle Countryside YMCA, which, by the way, is the largest YMCA in the entire country, over 119,000 square feet. In 1976, as part of the bicentennial of the country, the Warren County Historical Society, which, as you heard in Bob's introduction, I am the historian and education director, had a bicentennial prayer breakfast at the Golden Lamp. The price was only $3. Things have changed since then. Neil was the speaker. His topic was Americans Bicentennial, the Past and the Future. In 1980, Neil left the University of Cincinnati. He had taught 3 classes a week. He was beloved as a teacher. Frank Tepe, the Associate Dean of Graduate Education, says, I don't think I've ever talked to a student who didn't praise his teaching ability. He had a knack for translating difficult mathematical concepts and telling the students in a way that they could understand. A friend of mine who did not have Neil as a teacher, but was an aerospace engineer, recalls going to Baldwin Hall, where Neil's office was, and staring at the syllabus for her class. And she must have looked very worried because lo and behold, Neil Armstrong walks up behind her and he says, "Don't worry if you don't understand it now. It's our job to help you know what it's all about." Uh, Neil had, I've already mentioned that Vivian White was his secretary. She had worked for a local real estate firm and was a part-time secretary for the mayor of Lebanon. They kept on moving the office. For a while. It was right on Broadway, 48 in town. For a while, it was in southern Warren County near Fields Erdel Road, and another time it was on US Route 42 as you leave town. Vivian was a perfect person for the job. She never asked questions she didn't think she needed to know. She says, "I don't ask. That's my policy alone. You can tell he was a private person. I just made the point that I don't ask him anything I don't need to know for my job." Initially, there was no furniture in there. They worked off of a card table and some folding chairs. Finally, Mark helped his father bring in something into the office. For many years, Neil would sign anything that was asked for. He was famous for signing Eagle Scout Award congratulatory letters. He himself was an Eagle Scout. Then he found out that on the internet, people were saying, if you write Neil Armstrong, he'll send you a letter. And so they put a stop to that. There were a number of different things. Vivian said they had 11 boxes, and each box had a different type of request. One was for autographs. One was congratulatory letters for Eagle Scouts. One was information about piloting and space travel. Classroom requests, students asking for astronaut qualifications, contributing to charities, invitation to events, the speaking engagements, authors wanting forwards, finally one for media requests. If there was a technical question, Neil often had Vivian write, "Mr. Armstrong asked me to give you the following information." So nothing was really very personal from Neil's point of view. And then there was another file, the final file, and that was the wastebasket. Things that Vivian thought were far too personal for to be shown to Neil. In 1984, the Cincinnati Pops, under the direction of Eric Kunzel, had a grand gala performance at their new summer home at Riverbend Music Center. Ella Fitzgerald was singing with the orchestra, and Neil narrated Aaron Copland's Lincoln Portrait with the Cincinnati Pops. He was on the board of directors of many, many organizations, from TAP Broadcasting to the United Telephone, Marathon Oil, Cincinnati Gas and Electric, and Fifth Third Bank. He was a member of the Warren County Airport Board and used to fly his small plane in and out of the airport, which was only about a mile from his house. An interesting relationship soon developed between Neil and Lebanon. People knew he was uncomfortable. They would perhaps look at him. They wouldn't point him out. They wouldn't bother him. The Dayton Daily once said, Neil Armstrong's fellow citizens generally fall into two categories: protective acquaintances who guard his privacy, and curious strangers aware of his aloofness who eye him through a respectful distance. In July of 1994, and again in 1999, the 25th and 30th anniversary of the lunar landing, the Western Star was always inundated with what they referred to as Neil calls. Reporters from all over the world would either come to Lebanon or call Lebanon. We're talking about France, Norway, London, Houston, Dallas, New York. Everyone wanted to see Neil. Everyone wanted to get an interview. Some of them couldn't believe there wasn't a sign as you entered Lebanon, "Welcome to Lebanon, Ohio, home of Neil Armstrong." People just respected his privacy. Four days before the 25th anniversary, people were shocked. It was Sunday, July 17th. There was an air show in New Knoxville, Ohio, in Auglaize County. The Dayton Daily had a front page article, and it was called "Blue Moon Appearance." As people were watching the air show, all of a sudden, a small golf cart was being driven toward the center of the area, and people started whispering it was Neil Armstrong. He then got on the platform and did color commentary for all the other things going on in the air show. A parachutist jumped 4,000 feet above, and Neil was talking, "Oh, that's fantastic." He talked about his first air show when he was 2 years old, and he talked about how much he would love to have been up there. He said, "I take pride in the fact that Auglaize County was the birthplace of my aviation. I wish I was up there now." And he was quite open. He shook hands. He met with people. He met some people who knew his parents, and they were all aglow because we never thought we would ever meet anybody famous, and he invited us to his farm, and it was very, very nice. 3 days later, he's in the White House at the 25th anniversary, which I've already mentioned. He made that comment about Wilbur Wright. Neil was a very average person in many ways. In 1999, the postal clerk at the Lebanon Post Office, which, by the way, is now part of the Warren County Historical Society's Harmon Museum. It's called the Armstrong Conference Center. It is named after Neil's family. They couldn't name it after Neil Armstrong, but apparently that's trademarked by, I believe, the University of Purdue University. But the Armstrong Conference Center refers to the family. And so there now. We're setting up a lot of different Neil artifacts, from paintings and a bust, his unassuming paperweight, which had a hot air balloon on it, and a pen holder, which simply said "third place in the Special Olympics golf outing." Very unassuming things, but these were things that either Neil didn't want to be fancy, or that Vivian White gave the Historical Society because of Neil didn't want him in, and so she shared him with us. But back when that was a post office, Patsy Gillespie, who was a postal clerk, would say he would come in, say hi, and she said I couldn't say hi, Mr. Armstrong, that might embarrass him, but I would say hi to him, and he would go to the Town and Country Cleaners on Columbus Avenue, US 42, and they would ask, "What name should we put it under?" And he said, N.A. Armstrong. And he said, well, everybody knew who it was, but we had to ask him. And one of his office was in one of the buildings there on Columbus Avenue. The Ohio State Extension office was nearby. and he would often stop by and talk to the secretary, and very, very much an average person. In 1994, a golfing buddy, Dr. Jim Davenport, a dentist, said this is what he was like in Lebanon. He knew he could come here and sit at the table and be left alone. He would answer questions real quick and then change the subject. You can talk to him about his golf game, talk to him about cutting the lawn, but he really didn't want to talk about going on the moon. He liked golf. That's more than like. He loved golf. It was an obsession with him. When we had the dedication of Neil Armstrong Way, Mark, his son, said, if my father was here, one of the first things he would ask, could this get me to Harmon Golf Course quicker? He loved the finishing. He didn't want any free strokes in golf. One of his golfing buddies saw him once, saw somebody with their pants rolled up in a water hazard. And Dale Peach was his name. And Dale thought he was a local lawyer named Jack Hedges. And Dale yells, "Hey, Jack, too cheap to buy a new ball?" And then the guy looks up, and it's Neil Armstrong. He was determined to get that golf ball out of the water hazard. Once on a golf outing out in Brightleaf Golf Resort in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, a group of them were all in a private dining area. And a very timid waitress walked up to him and said, "I understand one of you is Neil Armstrong." And then Mike Norris, one of Neil's golfing buddies, said, "Yes, that would be me." And everybody laughed. But after that, Neil identified himself. And the waitress turned to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Armstrong, you've been on the moon, you've been all over, and I've never left this county." And he looked at her and he said, "That's all right, honey. I'm sure you have experiences that I will never have." And he was very comforting and very empathetic with her. Many people would decline to be interviewed during the 30th anniversary. Some of them said, we're going to respect his privacy. A man named Timothy Gaffney from the Dayton Daily News wrote an article on July 20th of '99, said, Neil Armstrong hasn't been a very good storyteller, but what a story he gave us to tell. There is a story I was told every time I give this speech, people come up to me and they tell me something new. So it always gets longer and longer. There was a group of high school students who were a member of the Lebanon Marching Band. They had their T-shirts at Lebanon Marching Band, and we had a Godfather's Pizza at that time. And they were in line and they were talking about band camp and all that. And they didn't pay much attention as to who was in front of them. But when they came up to buy their pizza, the clerk said, "Your pizza's been paid for by that gentleman over there." And they looked over, and it was Neil Armstrong. There are stories about when his son Mark was playing basketball on the Lebanon basketball team, all his friends would sit very close to him so people couldn't go up to him and bother him for an autograph. Rosie Vandegrift, who is the wife of Lebanon High School's legendary football coach, Jim Vandegrift, who retired some years ago, said once, now this is proof he's not a recluse. The boosters for the athletic program is going to have a haunted house at the fairgrounds. And Neil Armstrong was approached, "Would you be part of our haunted house?" And Neil said yes. And so if you paid your $5 or whatever it might be, and you go through there, you come to one area and there is a coffin. In the coffin is Neil Armstrong with a cow's heart on his chest. He was very, very much a part of the community. In 1994, although he was not always giving the interviews, the Dayton Daily ran a story, and one of the reporters said that they talked to an unnamed female neighbor who said Neil Armstrong should be jailed for walking his dog on her land. She went on to say Neil Armstrong may have walked in the moon, but it doesn't give him permission to walk on her property. Well, when I told that story at the dedication of Neil Armstrong Way, Rick, the older son, said, that story's bogus. Dad didn't walk the dog. He just opened the door, and the dog ran out. Now, one thing that did sort of upset Neil, even after he moved to Indian Hill, he still got his hair cut in Lebanon. And Mark's Barbershop, right across from the fairgrounds, Mark Sizemore was the barber he went to. And it soon became apparent that Marx had collected Neil's hair trimmings and sold them for $3,000 to a man who collects, supposedly has the world's largest hair clipping collection, and has Abraham Lincoln, Marilyn Monroe's, Albert Einstein's, and Napoleon Bonaparte's part of their hair. Neil threatened to sue. Did not. He asked for the return of the hair. The hair was not returned, although the money paid for it was given to charity. Neil's lawyers contended that that violated a law. They had passed a law in Ohio, which for all intentional purposes is the Neil Armstrong law. The right of publicity to make money off of Neil's persona would not be allowed for some 60 years after his death. So it basically was there to protect famous people, but Neil was the initial one. In 1989, Neil was given a special award at the Lebanon Area Chamber of Commerce. They had a meeting at La Comedina Dinner Theater in Springboro. They declared November 1st, 1978, Neil Armstrong's Day. The newspaper reporter said the audience received Armstrong with a resounding ovation, and it was the first time many of them, Lebanon residents, had seen him in person. I contend that is not the case. I think that is the first time many Lebanon residents realized that they had seen him in person. He may have been in front of them at the post office, or in line at the dry cleaners, or he was sitting at the counter at the village ice cream parlor. Janet, his first wife, died in June of 2018. She was 84 years old, 5 years and 10 months after Neil passed away. She had a long battle with lung cancer. She was, as if you've seen the movie The First Man, it depicts her quite well. She was an excellent swimmer. She was part of a aquatic synchronized swimming team coach while he was an astronaut. She was a founding member of KIT, K-I-T, Keep in Touch, a group of astronaut women, because only they can understand what kind of stress they're going through. Her obituary said by all who knew her, she will be remembered as a strong, willful woman that always reunited with warm smiles and parted ways with tears. We ask only that you honor her by standing up for that in which you believe. In 1969, she told Life magazine, "I'm not married to an astronaut. I'm married to Neil Armstrong. I I knew he wanted to go to the moon somehow, some way, and we were married, knowing that doesn't change my life. To me, he will always be Neil Armstrong, husband, father of my 2 boys. She died 3.5 months before the movie First Man came out. British actress Claire Foy played her and did a very nice job, by the way. Claire did say, I was never in a room with Janet. I always regret that. But then after some reflection, she said, I didn't want to put her in a position where she had to talk to some random actress about her marriage. I think she's a public, I don't think that she had a public and private self. I think she was a very private person. Neil, the movie did quite well. It got 10 nominations for Academy Awards. They did a lot of research. Neil, the man who played Neil, whose name I just forgot, Ryan Gosling, excuse me. Yeah. He did a lot of research. He did visit the Armstrong Museum up in Wapakoneta. Mark, Neil's youngest son, has a small part in the movie. If you see the movie, he played Paul Haney, Haney. Gemini 8, the first docking of 2 vehicles in space. Neil was the pilot. As you may recall, if you've seen the movie or the actual event, that the capsule was spinning out of control. And Neil was fighting to get control of that, the pilot that he was. Kyle Chandler, who was playing Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts, and the chief astronaut officer, yells to Paul Haney, cut the box, referring to turn off the audio speaker that's in the Armstrong house. They didn't want Janet to hear what was going on, just in case everything really went bad. So although he's blurred in the movie, that was Mark Armstrong who he's telling to cut the box. I don't know if you know what the theremin is. The theremin is a musical instrument which makes sound by how close your hand is to this electronic field. And Neil loved the theremin. He actually wrote a piece for it called Lunar Rhapsody. Also another piece called Egelloc, Egellloc, which happens to be the word college spelled backwards. He played with it quite a bit in college. When they made the movie, they took they had a suburb of Atlanta play Houston, where Neil's house was. They took the exact plans of Neil's house and reproduced it for the movie. So if you see the movie, what that house looked like in the movie is in fact what the house actually looked like. There were some things that experts and family members say it didn't happen. Neil never looked up at the sky and thought about quietly going to the moon. It's questionable whether or not he ever took his little thing from his daughter and placed it on the moon. One thing that was very correct, and his children said this several times, is the talk Janet wanted him to have with the boys. Sit down, this is dangerous stuff. I may not come back. So at the kitchen table, that talk was real. And of course, that was a fear. Frank Morman, another astronaut, was with President Nixon when it took off. And Nixon turned to him at one time and said, well, what do you think I should prepare for? And Borman turned to him quite frankly and said, prepare to what you would say to the widows. You also may recall that the family sold a lot of personal items of Neil's in 3 different auctions. Some of the things were, they actually made several $1 million. A identification plate from Apollo 11 sold for $468,000. Apollo, a little sliver of the Wright Flyer, which was sent on up to the moon, also went over $100,000. His Boy Scout field cap sold for $12,000. A crayon drawing with flowers, and he made in first grade for his mother, sold for $15,000. A childhood letter he wrote to the Easter Bunny sold for $4,000. One of the more interesting things, and I got a big kick out of this. You remember I told you that Neil did not like to owe money. So there's a 1970, I believe it's 1974. Anyway, it is a letter. It's a rejection letter from the Diners Club. Since Neil did not have any credit history, he was being turned down for a Diners Club credit card. Also, back in those days, you had to pay a small fee, and they were returning his check also. So you may have walked on the moon, but you don't have enough credit to be have a Diners Club. With the 50th anniversary of his flight, Wapakoneta did some interesting things. There was a summer moon festival on July 12th to the 21st, and a dozen restaurants and bars started selling special things related to Neil Armstrong. There was the what they call the Galaxy of Good Food, the Hometown Hero Layered Sundae, which was a scoop of ice cream, black raspberry syrup, chocolate chunks, and vanilla and whipped cream. Moon Pie Tornado, Galaxy A Swirl, raspberry blueberry swirl. Lucky Astor restaurant had cinnamon moon pancakes, cinnamon craters, sugar glaze, and cream cheese. Bob Evans had Houston, we have a pot roast. And Moeller Brew Barn had First on the Moon Ale. And one of the bars had Armstrong and Buzz Shooters, as well as a Foon Moon Teeny, which was grape vodka, blue Curacao, and lemonade. Back in 1999, Jack Hedges, a golfing buddy of his, said, I don't know what we're going to do, but we've got to do something to honor him. But we couldn't do it without his blessing. After Neil's death, his family did make the statement, for those who wish to ask what they can do to honor Neil, we simply have a one request: honor his example of service, accomplishment, and modesty. As I remarked back in October 7th of 2014 at the dedication of Neil Armstrong Way, the 3/4 mile road, I think he would appreciate having his name placed on such a small and useful stretch of road that will serve his former neighbors in Warren County, Turtlecreek Township in Lebanon. This road will make their lives a little easier and a little safer. I think that would be Neil Armstrong's way. Thank you.
Well, Ron, thank you very much for that most interesting presentation and all the great detail you gave on Neil's life and the connection with the community. I'm No, everyone will enjoy it, and thank you very much for participating in our seminar series.
It's my pleasure, Bob.
And next month, we're going to have another interesting program, so please tune in. As long as the pandemic occurs, we're going to be doing everything virtually, but be aware, tell your friends, this will be posted on YouTube, and so there'll be an opportunity to share it with your friends and see if you didn't see it tonight. Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone.